And welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by Bryan Smith. Bryan, you're back. You're back from vacation. You're back to talk Cubs prospects, and actually more than Cubs prospects today. But how you doing, dude?
I'm doing good. It's been catch up, like try to figure out what's going on in the Cubs minor leagues, and try to see what I missed while I was away. And it's been helpful to have you guys there to sort of lean on, and just really, it's kind of like look at a box score, see what's interesting, go catch up on video is sort of what it's been so far. And this week should allow me to actually get back on track to like watch games from the beginning and stuff, which will be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I know we say it a lot, but like really we are it makes our jobs like coming on and talking about prospects easy when you got a whole bunch of people on Twitter talking about Cubs minor league prospects. You got a whole bunch of people in the 1060 West Discord channel talking about Cubs prospects as the games are going on, which is super fun. Like there are so many people that get into this and post on public forums about the game action where it's like I can go if I had several nights this past week where I wasn't watching the games live, and that happens a lot where like I'm not watching the games live as they're happening, but like I can go back after dinner that night, go back and check the Discord, and people are talking about Michael Arias. So I'm like, oh, let me go back and watch Michael Arias's outing, his 2 innings of work and relief, or like just things like that, where it's like it makes it easy to go back instead of like sorting through the box scores. Like maybe I want to go check out Connor Nolan. Like I know I want to go check out Connor Nolan because I've seen people talking about it. You know what I mean? So I don't
I
know.
mean,
It makes it super easy.
that's something Cubs minor leaguers talk about. Like, they're absolutely aware of how different it is, how much, how much more followed they are than guys in other systems that they're friends with. It's a unique thing that I think is definitely a plus in the column of this fan base.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I mean, today, so we were trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about today. And it crossed our minds to kind of talk about some of the hot starts or cool starts throughout the system. But honestly, like I think that talking for an hour about that might just be a little bit too much, given that some of these guys are at 29 plate. Like you got Matt Shaw, obviously has been absurd, otherworldly. He's got a OPS of what one almost 1.5 is his
Yeah.
OPS. So he's been terrific. You got on the other end of the spectrum, Kevin Alcantara doesn't have a hit yet through 20 some odd plate appearances. But like again, that's a week and a half's worth of games, and spending an hour talking about them probably isn't fair in a lot of ways. It's reacting too quickly to what's going on. I know that like the big thing I always refer back to Brennan Miller always like puts extreme emphasis on the fact that like you need 50 plate appearances
Yep.
for stuff to make some sort of sense, right? For the strikeout rates to be like, oh, like those are kind of believable, or the walk rates or the ISO that a guy is posting and stuff like that. Like you need 50 plate appearances. And right now the AAA guys are the only players in the organization that have those 50 plate appearances so far. So yeah, it's we shouldn't dig into those. So we're not going to. If you guys are watching on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But if you're watching on YouTube, you saw the intro little video play. The podcast listeners had the music, but we had some major league players on that. The players of note for this episode. So we're going to talk about the prospects. That's what we do on this show. But we're going to put a little bit of a major league slant on it a little bit because we're going to talk about first round draft picks today because you brought it to my attention here, and I think this is a good idea to kind of reframe, not reframe, but just frame how we look at first round picks and how they get developed, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's so early to talk about stuff definitively, but when I'm in April and I'm following, not just a major league team, but an organization, like I think about it. I try to think about April baseball in terms of what looks different in a sustainable way that matters to the organization. Like there are things that are happening that matter to like individual wins, but we don't know that it'll carry over for a month. If I had to think about what, and I was thinking today, what has happened so far in the Cubs season throughout the whole organization that matters. The things that jump out to me are like what Michael Busch is doing, what Jordan Wicks fastball is doing, and what Matt Shaw has looked like coming out of the gate in Double A. And so I had those three things in my head as things that sort of jumped out, and I tried to think about, okay, what's a through line between those three guys? And the interesting, connection between all three of them is that they're first round draft picks. And so I thought it might be, I don't know, informative maybe to talk about what different first round picks look like in terms of what are the first round picks that are in the Cubs organization from A ball up to the major leagues, and a little bit about like the different shapes of development that some of those careers took for the major league veterans, and just where the guys are on their developmental curve if they're still in the minors.
Yeah, so we've got 11 first round picks in the Cubs organization right now. 11 guys. There are four of those were not at, or actually, sorry, five of those were not drafted by the Cubs in the first round. So you got the five non-Cubs first round picks, which are Dansby Swanson, Jameson Taillon, Nick Madrigal, Michael Busch, and our guy Pete Crow-Armstrong, drafted by the Mets. Yep. And then the other six are Cubs first round draft picks. That's Ian Happ, Nico Hoerner, Jordan Wicks, Ed Howard, Cade Horton, and Matt Shaw are the six Cubs first round picks. So there's 11 in the organization. That's a lot. I mean, honestly, that's a lot. That's a lot of first round picks. It helps when you bring in 5 former first round picks through trades. Or through trades or free agency. That helps pretty significantly. But having 11, and I don't have that compared to other organizations, but I bet that's up there with some of the highest.
One, it's a lot for an organization that never gets a second first round pick because of how big their market size is, and who lost a first round pick during the Theo era at least once, maybe more than once. So yeah, given those limitations, I definitely think it's a lot. I think there's probably some organizations that have stockpiled a few first round picks over the years. The St. Louis Cardinals getting fed by Rob Manfred a first round pick every once in a while, that they might have they might have a decent number, but 11 is especially 6 internal ones is nice.
This just in, the St. Louis Cardinals just got an additional draft pick because we're talking about
because I whined about it.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to lead off with you. I want to kick it to you first, and just kind of let you run with how you want to frame this conversation today, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're recording this on April 15th before the game tonight. So right now, as we're speaking, Michael Busch is on a 4 home run, 4 games in a row with a home run. I think has sort of emerged as the talking point of Cubs baseball right now. And, I think what we might have the opportunity to do is just sort of talk about Michael's development and how that's, we're playing catch up a little bit because we didn't watch all his games when he was in the Dodger system, but there's development that's happened even since last year that you can see. So, I definitely think that we should start with him because I think he is like the headliner right now.
Yeah, and I think that if we're talking about the development path of a first round draft pick, he is ultra unique. I know we talked about Michael Busch when he was first acquired. It's kind of appropriate that we're talking about him now when he started off the season as a prospect. Obviously, I think the very first game he got in this year at the major league level is when he no longer was a prospect because I think he just needed 2 at bats or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, Michael Busch was drafted in 2019 by the LA Dodgers. He was, of all the draft picks we're going to talk about today, he was the latest draft pick in the first round. He was actually the 31st overall pick in that 2019 draft. And we know that guys drafted in 2019 had quite the start to pro baseball where they got drafted. A lot of guys either went to short season ball or started off in the Arizona or Florida complex leagues, things like that, but really didn't it was just getting their feet wet in professional baseball, only to have their first full season taken out by COVID. So Michael Busch was one of those guys that he was a college draft pick, so he was already older, and then he missed the COVID year. This is before I think that a lot of times we frame Michael Busch as being an older rookie, and we look at it like, oh, it's because he was behind Freddie Freeman and Max Muncy and Mookie Betts and whoever else, and Shohei Ohtani. And that's fair. I think we should that should be brought up. But it also he's also older because of everything else that happened prior to him being ready for the major leagues. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the other thing to mention, I think, with Busch is he's drafted 31st. The Cubs drafted that year 27th. So the Cubs had a chance at Michael Busch. I believe that it was even sort of rumored that they had looked at him when he was at the University of North Carolina. They went with Ryan Jensen instead. I mean, that was a year that definitely had some like corner college bats. You had like Josh Young at Texas Tech. You had Michael Toglia at UCLA, Cody Hosey at Tulane. So there were like some options. Cam Meisner was a center fielder at Missouri, but another one of I think he was seen as sort of a corner thumper bat. And Busch was just sort of like, he felt like he was in the morass there. And I think the thing that jumped out back then, and even like, I admit when the Cubs acquired him, like he was a first baseman that doesn't really physically look that much like a first baseman. He's not super like muscular. He doesn't scream a guy that's going to hit 30 home runs in the bigs. And I think that probably slowed some teams down from getting him. And, especially when he didn't hit a ton last year, I think a lot of people sold off his prospect stock because they're like, okay, maybe there's not the power under the hood here.
Thinking back to that 2018 draft, like Cody Hosey was a guy that I really wanted the Cubs to take. I remember like specifically that name standing out as a guy that I wanted. Looking back at that era of draft picks, that was a time when the Cubs did not have first baseman in the organ. Like Matt Mervis was not yet there. Hayden McGeary, Brian Calmer, Johnny Long, like those draft picks, that was not like the Cubs did not do that ever. Like they did not draft first baseman. There was a stretch there of like 8 straight years where they drafted like 2 first basemen. And so like it was one of those picks where like the Michael Busch, the pick came and went for the Cubs. Michael Busch was not selected. And it's like not something where you're like, oh, like I really expected them to take him. Like you didn't expect them to take him because of their draft profile.
Right.
Looking now, I guess I'll ask you, it's like, if Michael Busch was in this year's draft, is he a guy that you think the Cubs would target in this year's draft?
Honestly, I mean, I don't think that we have the evidence that they would. I mean, they're a team that looks for athletes in the middle, even if they know that those guys will have to move. And we'll talk about some of those guys. Busch hit what he hit. He hit 16 home runs his last year at North Carolina, which we have guys now that are going to get drafted in the first round this year that are well past 16 already this year. I mean, Charlie Condon at Georgia has, I think, freaking 25 home runs, and Jack at Florida, I know, is above 16 already. So like the idea of a first base college bat that doesn't get to 20 home runs, I don't think that gets drafted in the first round.
Yeah. But I think it's important to see how he continued to develop. I think part of how he developed throughout his minor league career from being a first baseman is that he also did dabble in playing some third base and some second base. And I think that like, obviously he hit and that's what got him to the major leagues because he didn't play good defense anywhere, but like showing that there's at least a little bit of flexibility is a nice little wrinkle thrown into the mix with Michael Busch. And that I think that kind of shows off the athleticism he has at the plate, in addition to some athleticism in the field. And that's the main reason why he was a first round pick when he was.
So this year, I mean, as we transition to thinking about whether the development that's happened so far is sustainable, like I think it's worth pointing out that the big thing that has changed this year versus last year, I mean, we're nearing the point where he's seen as many pitches this year as he did last year already at the big league level. So it's almost like a 1-to-1 comparison in terms of the sample size. And the number that jumps out to me the most when I looked at it is last year with the Dodgers, Busch, on balls that he put into play, he topped 48% of balls that he put into play. This year, that number is at 17%. And instead, last year he had about 19% of balls that were either described as flares or barrels. This year, that number has jumped. I mean, this is a freaking ridiculous number. 47% of his batted balls are either flares or barrels. He has a 97th percentile rating for barreling balls this year in the majors. So, if that is sustainable to any degree, if he ends up a 90th plus percentile guy in barreling the ball this year, then what jumps out to me more than anything, honestly, is we might have a hitting coach that's like a really good hitting coach for the first time. Like my whole life, people have complained about the Cubs hitting coaches. Like that's like just been the easiest thing to say forever. And there's like some evidence happening with Michael Busch right now that Dustin Kelly might be a dude of a coach.
Yeah, I mean, the Cubs have gone through. I mean, speaking of lifetime, the Cubs have gone through the past 10 years. They've gone through 7 different hitting coaches, something like that. So
Yep.
yeah, to have a guy like Dustin Kelly who seems to be really damn good is super fun. You want to transition from Michael Busch, who had kind of a roundabout way. I mean, I think this whole thing is fun to think about how different. Like it might be a guy might be a first round pick, but they still take very, very different paths. You go from Michael Busch to let's look at a guy like Dansby Swanson or Jameson Taillon, right? Those are 2 guys that have now reached the free agency stage of their career, right? They've signed big free agent contracts. Dansby Swanson was a first overall pick in 2015. Jameson Taillon was a second overall pick in 2010. Those are 2 guys that they were pretty quick risers, relatively speaking, to the major league. They were always, I guess, they were always top guys. There were never questions about them until they reached the major league level.
Yeah, I mean, Dansby's a great one to transition to because it's almost the same thing we were just talking about. If I go back and I look at Dansby's numbers, his first full season in the big leagues, 3% of his batted balls are barrels. And it looked like he was not a sustainable, he was not a hitter that was going to make it. And, the defensive value was not going to be worth it because the offense was going to be so bad. He was kind of lucky that he got as much runway as he did at the major league level. I don't know if he was not the first overall pick, if he would have gotten that much runway. But then you flash forward 2-3 years from that first season, and that barrel rate goes from 3% to 11%. His topped balls goes from 36% to 25%. So that gives me hope when I talk about Michael Busch and I say, is it sustainable that he can keep barreling balls like this when it seemed like that wasn't his strength last year? Dansby's sort of proof that you do keep developing at the major league level. And when when scouts have seen you well enough to say, we will spend a first round pick on this guy, that means they believe that the guy can be taught to hit it at the big league level. And if it doesn't happen right away, it still might later. And Dansby's proof of that.
Yeah, but I'd almost even push back on the if he wasn't the first overall pick, that he wouldn't have been given as much leeway to struggle at the main. I think that a first round pick, we're talking about the differences in these first round picks, but at the same time, a first round pick is a first round pick. The difference with Dansby though is that he was drafted first overall by the Diamondbacks,
right,
and then traded to the Braves.
Yeah.
And so that just gets an extra kind of wrench thrown into things where the Braves valued him differently than the Diamondbacks valued him, because the Diamondbacks valued him only in terms of that signing bonus they gave him for first overall and the fact that they needed him to succeed because he was the first overall pick. But the Braves, on the other hand, they didn't pay him the signing bonus money, but they did give up a trade to make him the lead target in return, And so I don't know. I think that had Dansby been a later first round pick, I still think that he probably would have gotten quite a bit of leeway to struggle at shortstop for the Braves. But you're right, with him being the first overall pick, that just brings more legitimacy to him as a player in general,
Yeah, I mean, if we keep it free flowing into the guys that we're going to talk about, I mean, really, it'd be interesting to talk about Pete Crow-Armstrong in that exact sense, because that's another first round pick that the Cubs didn't make, they acquired.
Yeah.
So they valued differently than the Mets did. I think in baseball in general, I was talking to somebody inside the game about this just in the last week or so, about how prospects, getting traded, man, it became so much less prevalent, I think, in the last 5-6 years for top 100 prospects to get traded and a first round pick to get traded. And the Cubs sort of snuck under the, I think because Pete got injured that year, they were able to acquire him, and then he takes off in the Cubs organization. But, it's interesting to think about, okay, if you acquire a first round pick, are you even more sort of tied to him? And that, that's something that, given the context of Pete's struggles last year, will he get a bunch of runway? Like, is he guaranteed a bunch of runway in Chicago at some point in the way that Dansby was guaranteed it in Atlanta? Or are the Cubs at a part of the winning cycle where like they can't guarantee it and he is going to have to force the issue? I'm fascinated by the answer to that one.
Yeah, dude, honestly, I didn't even think about the comparisons between these two guys. They're incredibly similar. I mean, like even down to the fact that like they're both defensive studs.
Yeah.
That the bat just needs to figure it out. What do you remember where the Braves were in their kind of contention window when Dansby came up? It was kind of the beginning of the whole thing. I am picturing, right?
That would make sense, right?
And so, I mean, not all that dissimilar from Pete Crow-Armstrong with the Cubs competing starting last year and this year, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, so the Braves went 72-90 the year that Dansby got 144 games to like really start, and so they were pretty bad. But then his next season, they won the division, and so like they're those 2018 Braves could have moved on from Dansby, and instead they decided to go with him, and they were paid by him being a little bit better and helping them win the division. So there is like a lesson from that, maybe.
Yeah, you know what also probably contributes is this is something we can't do on the spur of the moment, I'm sure, but the depth behind Dansby Swanson or around Dansby Swanson makes a difference compared to the depth around Pete Crow-Armstrong, because the Cubs do have other outfielders, right? I mean, they have three legitimate outfielders in Cody Bellinger, Ian Happ, and Seiya Suzuki. And so like that, and then besides that, you got Alexander Canario, you got Owen Casey in AAA as well. Like there's other dudes versus maybe the Braves at the time when Dansby was coming up and struggling. They didn't have any better options or similar options as Dansby, so they just let it ride out. It's like, let's just make sure that Dansby can work. Let's try to make Dansby work. Versus Pete Crow-Armstrong, it's like, all right, if he doesn't, then we have alternatives, which is a good, like that's really good for the health of your organization, right? For the Cubs to be able to say, if PCA isn't in the major leagues this year, if he's not figuring it out next year, that's fine because we still have other guys. But yeah, the similarities between those two guys is I didn't even consider coming into this how similar they really are, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, Pete is going to have to make some offensive improvements in the way that Dansby did for his career to get to like the ceiling that we believe is in there. Mm-hmm. And this, we're not going to overreact to the sample this year, but it has been a bit of a rough start for Pete, and not so much like, I mean, he has a 614 OPS. That doesn't bother me as much as like only 2 walks against 17 strikeouts and 55 plate appearances. Like when Pete's sort of down a little bit, I think he can get away from his plate approach. And, I do think I'm not worried about like his ability to hit balls in the zone. I think in the long run of a season, he's going to attack enough like early count pitches to like make a difference to winning offensively for the teams he plays for. But there's something about his slumps to me that always seem to go a little lower. That he can like get out of his approach a little more, and that is something that's just going to have to improve.
A good example of that is this past week he went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts, right? Like that's a good example of like when he's down, even on a game-to-game basis. Right now, I think as far as PCA goes, we're seeing the flaws in his game. We're seeing like we're seeing that kind of even more so, right? That we were worried about, like maybe he won't draw enough walks, and like he's really not drawing enough walks. Like maybe he's gonna chase change-ups from righties out of the zone. He's really chasing those change-ups. He chased several sliders, like back foot sliders this past week as well, I noticed. The things that I was worried about, he's doing those things poorly. Again, not worried. We're not reading into his 55 plate appearance sample size.
Well, and if Dansby Swanson is a lesson, it's a lesson that like you can sit there and only focus on the flaws, and you can think a guy sucks, right? Like I could say, oh my God, our shortstop strikes out 150 times. What are we doing? But you're missing all the amazing things that he does well too. And I mean, that's something that the Cubs will weigh in the long run. Is like, Pete does a ton of things that are really good for a locker room. You know, he is though going to have to get a little bit better at just sort of the bottom line things to get the opportunity. I don't think it will come as guaranteed as it did for Dansby.
Yeah, I agree. You got anything else on Pete?
No.
Let's can we talk about Nick Madrigal and Nico Hoerner? Same draft.
I mean, two guys that were argued about because it was Cubs and White Sox, right? Like I had text arguments with White Sox fans like when they were still in the minors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, same draft, right? So they're both the 2018 draft. Nick Madrigal was drafted out of Oregon State with the 4th overall pick by the White Sox. Nico Hoerner was drafted also out of the Pac-12 from Stanford with the 24th overall pick in 2018. And really,
let me contextualize it back then. Like Nick Madrigal goes into that season as like a no doubt sort of top 10 pick.
Yeah.
You know, was a top 5 prospect by like Baseball America, college, you know, draft prospect type guy. Nico Hoerner was not a top 100 Baseball America draft prospect on the day of the draft. So they were not in the same sort of universe as prospects. The Cubs pick was very surprising. The White Sox pick was not.
Which, so I can't remember. Like, I'm not the draft guy around here, but like, why was that the case? Because I'm looking at. I know it's easy to say like, look now, right, and say like, look at Nick Madrigal, look at Nico Hoerner, but like, why back then was 5'2" Nick Madrigal? Why was he the top 5 guy, and why was Nico Hoerner, who had the Stanford swing that you can fix up a little bit and really played really good defense, like why was he not top 100 guy?
You know, I mean, that's funny. I think Madrigal might be like we might look back and be like the exit velocity era started like the day after Nick Madrigal was drafted. You know, he is like the one that sort of got to sneak in under the wire. And like, you know, he was so good his freshman year. I think that's honestly the biggest difference is, you know, he played for a really good Oregon State team as a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking back, he struck out 14 times in 49 games as a freshman in the Pac-10 playing, you know, in the Oregon State schedule that's always super tough. Then goes to summer college ball, strikes out 7 times in 44 games. So he had just put himself on the map freshman year in a way that Nico didn't. Nico just was a later bloomer. And then Nick gets in the USA baseball circuit where Nico went to the Cape and impressed the Cubs at the Cape. But yeah, I think a lot, this happens in prospecting all the time, doesn't it? Is like the guy that does it first, like holds on to his prospect status for so long, and the guy that comes late has a really hard time catching up.
Yeah. I think that in multiple ways, in practice, in the way that guys get scouted and drafted and promoted through a system and debut in Chicago or debut in the majors and are given a chance or not given an extended chance, stuff like that. And also from like our perspective, where we're ranking players and we're comparing prospects against each other and stuff like that. I think that in both ways, it becomes very difficult on the second guy to do it. And I don't know. And I think that when I'm looking at certain, I think I get that way with relief prospects a lot, like relief pitcher prospects a lot. I get that way with guys that are, although I'll push back a little bit actually, because I'm looking at, maybe it's the next new shiny thing is we sometimes react that way to some prospects, right? Where it's like, you look at like Nelson Velasquez and Alexander Canario, which were two very similar types of players in a lot of different ways. And it's like, all right, like we have Nelson Velasquez and then we acquire Alexander Canario. It's like, I don't want to play with you anymore, Nelson Velasquez. We have Alexander Canario. You know what I mean? And Canario is great. He just got called up, obviously, to Chicago and is going to get probably a pretty decent run with Seiya Suzuki hitting the injured list for probably quite some time. So I'm not saying that Nelson Velasquez is better than Alexander Canario, but I think that like he was the new shiny thing that we were excited to see in action, even though they were similar players. So I guess it does go both ways, really.
It does. And I'm curious, looking back, like just like without even looking back at the numbers, like you were following it back then. when do you remember feeling like Nico Hoerner was not a big leaguer? Like when did you think this is a guy who's going to be like a 3-WAR player in the bigs? Like do you have like a timeline of when you thought that was in the cards for him?
When I thought he was going to be like a 3-WAR player, I don't know. I think it was it wasn't until he started like ascending pretty quickly up the organization that I thought it was, because I saw that the way the Cubs front office was handling his promotions.
Yeah.
And because of that, I was like, oh, because I liked from the day he was drafted, I liked what Nico Hoerner was about, right? Like I was excited about what Nico Hoerner was as a prospect, the style of player that he was, the defense first, the contact oriented approach. I loved all of that, but it was once the Cubs like clearly like that. I guess draft day started that process, but once he really started progressing, I was like, maybe there's something a little bit extra in what they see, which is if we're comparing that to a current Cubs prospect, Jefferson Rojas. Jefferson Rojas is what I would like. Different, obviously, very different players. I believed in Jefferson Rojas early last year, right? After he came out to Myrtle Beach, he started killing it right away. I really believed in Jefferson Rojas. It was this spring when we saw Rojas play in a lot of Major League Spring Training games. I was like, the Cubs are definitely seeing it too. Like they're about it. So it just kind of confirmed any like inkling that I had that Jefferson Rojas was a thing. Like now, like he's really a thing, And I think I felt that way about Nico at the time too.
I think I was like pretty late, my thought with Nico was always like, there's a big leaguer here, but is the offensive stuff going to be worth it enough? Then if you remember back then, like the way we talk about fielding with prospects is always just like, we kind of like go based on the first scouting report we read. And then it takes a long time for it to change our mind. And like Nico was framed as like, might not stick at shortstop. And sometimes that's seen as like, well, that means he's a bad defender. What it really meant, I think, was like, he's just a really good second baseman. And then he improved his arm and actually turned out to be a really good shortstop too. He won me over, I think, not till he was in Chicago and I saw the defense for like 20 games. It was like, oh, this guy can actually pick it enough to like, an empty 300 batting average with his defense will still be worth it. And then, now like we're talking about a guy who's still developing. Like he is trying to change his offensive approach this year. It hasn't gone particularly great yet, but he's seeing a ton more pitches. He's looking to pull the ball a little more. Like it's really fascinating to see like development at the major league level. That's one of my favorite things to like watch, that gets us back to like the Michael Busch talk. Like Nico is in the thick of major development right now.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about prospecting and defense, because I hate it more than anything? I like it is just the single most difficult thing in my eyes to judge, because we're paying attention to 150-ish prospects, and so much of it is watching specific outings of pitchers, and watching specific plate approaches for specific players. It's like you're watching the players as much as you're watching the players more than you're watching the games. And I think you pick up on defensive ability when you're watching games. Like when I'm watching however many Cubs, like Chicago Cubs games over the course of the year, then I get a better idea for how good Nico Hoerner is at second base or shortstop. If I am just catching whiffs of defensive plays from BJ Murray at third base, I can't get a good idea of how good he's going to be. And so like, I want to look at Nico Hoerner and like Christopher Morel, right? Because Nico Hoerner, as he was coming up as a prospect, a lot of it was, okay, like, yeah, he can't stick it, like you mentioned, he can't stick at shortstop. So like, maybe the defense isn't very good. Now he's a guy who's like that 3-WAR player that he is entirely propped up by him being one of the best defensive middle infielders in all of baseball. Yep. But we didn't really see that coming because we didn't get a chance to watch him take 100 ground balls at shortstop during his time in the minor leagues. On the other end of the spectrum, Christopher Morel, we felt really like as I don't know. We felt decent about his defense because he made flashy plays, right? He made very flashy plays, and that caught highlight reels. That caught our eyes when we were going back and watching plays throughout the night or whatever. That caught our eyes, and we knew he was a good athlete. We knew he had a really strong arm, and it's like, oh, if he has those two things and he's making these flashy plays, he must be a good defender. And now we're running into a situation where Christopher Morel is brought down by his defensive ability at third base. So it's like it is so difficult, dude. It's so hard.
It's worth remembering too that like highlight plays are like they're it's a function of like the ball that's hit to you. And so like, you know, if we go back, I mean, Nico didn't play that. He played 98 games in the minors. Like it is possible that he had like 3 chances at highlight reel plays. And, you know, he probably didn't make them and it didn't tell us anything about it. Morel had chances. It just happened that he had chances at highlight reel plays, made them. Pete Crow-Armstrong is like the king of highlight reel plays, right? So like his defense got propped up so early because like, you know, he just like, I think he started showing up on those highlight reel things. And then like people tuned in and were like, oh, this is deserving. He actually is this good. You know, it's interesting to talk about this because Matt Shaw, you know, to transition it to Matt Shaw, defense is sort of the big question there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, how sticky are the defensive questions going to be from the scouting reports when he was drafted versus like, you know, I mean, I guess it's going to be on those of us that love watching minor league games to like do the work of like, we have to like not fall into the traps of like, of not making sure to go back and look at video and see like, it's important. I mean, the Cubs right now are actively trying to figure out, you know, how is this defense really? Not like, how was it at Maryland? Not, you know, not how would it be at shortstop? Like they know he's not going to be their big league shortstop. It's like, we're in this like very quick cycle of like, he has an opportunity to show that he can play third base. And if he does, like he could be in Chicago this year now. Like we are on Matt Shaw could be in Chicago in 2024 watch.
I mean, can I frame it this way where we were just talking about Nico Hoerner and we were saying, oh, like his scouting report for Nico Hoerner was that he can't stick at shortstop mostly because of the arm, right? But he's a really good athlete, and that's great. Matt Shaw, the conversation is he's a really good athlete. He was a shortstop in college, but he can't stick at shortstop because of the arm. And now is Matt Shaw, Nico Hoerner, like, hell no, I'm not putting those expectations on him. But like the conversation is the exact same that we were having with Nico Hoerner 4 years ago, you know? So do I really know? No, I don't know. And I get a lot of questions about like, how's Matt Shaw look at third base defensively? And good from what I've been able to tell, but also like going back to like how we consume these prospects is like, okay, I'm going back and if Porter Hodge struck out 3 and walked 2, I can see, I want to go see how did he go about striking out 3 and walking 2. Let me go back and watch that. If I go look at the box score and say, or the play-by-play and saw that Matt Shaw, that he made 3 defensive plays at third base, I can go back and watch those, but like, what will those really tell me? And what will the players that don't show up on the play-by-play as like getting past them?
That's the big thing, right? Is like what tells you about a defender is not, I mean, like errors matter. I mean, they matter in the case of like Christopher Morel. Generally speaking, like they don't really matter to tell you about how good a player is. What really matters for like a third baseman is how many plays in the 5.5 hole do you go get? And that's really hard to go back and like see how many 5.5 hole plays he's making. But like I can tell you right now, we're sitting here on April 15th. He's had 12 chances at third base. He's played 6 games there. He's of those 12, 5 of them are catches, which like I'm guessing he just like looked up and caught a baseball that like you know that my guy Greg Huss could probably catch. So there've been 7 plays in the field that like actually matter. So we don't know yet. And what's going to be really interesting about this season is like, when do the Cubs feel like they know enough to be like, it's worth taking a chance here? I mean, I guess I'll ask you, what would your Iowa promotion schedule for Shaw be? Would it be right now? Would it be if he crushes the ball for 2 more weeks? Would it be, I want to see 40 games at AA? Like, how are you thinking about AAA and him?
2 more weeks. No particular reason. It's 2. I just give him a little bit more time. Make sure that this isn't just something crazy over his first 20 some odd at bats, right? Over his first 29 at bats or plate appearances. Give him 2 more weeks in Tennessee. Call him up to Iowa because the bat will be what drives him. If the Cubs want him to work on defense, he can work on defense at Iowa the same way he can work on defense in Tennessee is the way I view it, right? If he is being promoted based on a schedule of like, is he matching up with pitchers at the plate the way that he should be, then yeah, like then hold him off in Tennessee if you want. But like that's not the case. He's killing it in Tennessee. Make sure it's legit. Make sure he feels comfortable. Pull him up to Iowa within the next couple of weeks, and then go from there. Then whether we see him in Chicago is, I think, at that point, based on what the Cubs think about him defensively. We won't know, like you and I, like we won't know defensively where Matt Shaw is before he's a major leaguer. Like it's just not gonna happen. Like he's like you just said, he said 7 chances. Like we will not see enough chances of Matt Shaw at third base or wherever before he reaches the major leagues for us to say anything with any level of confidence about what he is defensively. Yeah. And so it'll be a surprise. It'll be fun.
You know, the other thing I've been thinking so much about with Matt Shaw, I mean, Matt Shaw has, every time he's come up in a Twitter video of doing something good this season, like every time you see somebody be like, Matt Shaw to right field, Matt Shaw, Oppo Taco, and it's like professional hitter Matt Shaw to right field. There is, I've pointed this out in a couple places, I guess, but like there is part of me that wonders if it's to right field, and like we see to bring it back to Nico, like we can see the Cubs are telling Nico it's to right field for you, and they went about making changes for him. Are they looking at Matt Shaw in AA and saying it's to right field for you down there? And, maybe there's a chance that they're going to, even if the results are good, say, hey, we want you down here another month or so, because we want you to work on this one specific thing. Like I could see that conversation happening. That is something I think about with Matt, is like, he's good enough that minor league pitchers probably aren't going to be an issue, but major league pitchers, like, if you tell major league pitchers, like as an advanced scout, like all this guy wants to do is go to right field. You can pitch him inner third and he's going to inside out the ball to right field. If you pitch him outer third, he's sure as hell going to go to right field. Major league pitchers are going to feast on that. Like that, you give them like a guy who's like too set in his ways. It's just too good. Like they're too good at the top level. So I do wonder, I have a little bit of doubt, about Matt's bat still, which is crazy when we're talking about a 1400 OPS. But, I don't know if I'm being crazy and nitpicky because he is a first round pick to like bring it back to our bigger conversation. Like he gets held to a higher standard by being a first rounder. Or is that like a legitimate concern?
His percent of hits that have gone Oppo, it's 50% this year, which is like, that's crazy high. He's pulling the ball 28 or 29%, center field 21%, and Oppo 50%, which is like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous number.
That is, yeah. I think that is even like down. We're in a part of the schedule or like with the stat sample size where it can change so quickly, but I think it was like 60+% the other day. Like he is sat that way.
Yeah, he has. I guess it's a good problem to have at this point, obviously. And again, we're nitpicking because he's leading almost all stat categories in the system this year. Do
you think it's a legitimate nitpick, or do you think it's like it's digging in too far and trying to find a flaw where you don't have to find one?
No, I think it is. I don't think it's a nitpick. So I think that Oppo approach is not going to stop him from being a major league hitter, and even like a decent major league hitter. I think that like him being able to turn on fastballs will be what takes him to the next level at like that 4+ win player at the major league level. Like that really, really good player that we're talking about at the major league level, he won't be that if all he does is go oppo. If
Right.
he can turn on some fastballs, like then we're talking. So yeah, I think he can be I think he can be a major league regular. I think he can be like, I mean, you look at Nico Hoerner, right? I mean, he's a major leaguer. Would you consider Nico Hoerner a star in baseball? Like, no. I consider him a very good player. I like
Right.
having him on my team. One of my
Right.
favorite players. But Matt Shaw needs to pull the ball more. He needs to pull fastballs more. He needs to turn on
Yeah.
the ball. He needs to pull the ball in the air. That needs to happen. And maybe that development of that happens at the major league level. I think that it probably does.
Should
All
we
right, man.
switch to pitchers?
Yeah, we got some pitchers to talk about here. Let's do. You want to start with Jordan? I mean, I guess the two guys we can still talk about are Jordan Wicks and Cade Horton, and those are fun guys to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can frame it with Jordan Wicks as, Jordan. I think Jordan's one of the coolest things about this Cubs season so far, even though it hasn't actually led to winning yet. I
Mm-hmm.
just feel really confident that it's going to. I mean, basically, what has happened is, um, I think it started last September, and then it really carried through the offseason. Like the Cubs figured out a way to give more like rise, more, we say ride, but really like the appearance of a rising fastball to his fastball. Like when he was in the minor leagues, we talked about it all the time. Like, is the fastball good enough? He's like, we always said he's going to give up a bunch of home runs. And like what that usually means is like the fastball's not good enough to beat hitters so often that he's not going to just like 25 times a year, a major league hitter is not going to just turn on a fastball. And that was the concern. And, I thought Jordan was good enough anyway to be a number 4, number 5 starter, like with the old fastball. But like, it's not just a little better. It's like, it's gone from below average to above average and like flirting with plus when he gets it up to 94. And that just changes the whole profile, man. Like he's had some struggles with other pitches this year. I mean, he's even struggled with that when it's been down in the zone at times, and the walks haven't been great. Like he's probably adapting so much stuff that it's like messing with the sum a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's going to be worth it in the long run. Just like seeing him, it just looks right.
I mean, he even had a start where he threw very few changeups. He
Yeah.
didn't have the feel for the changeup. He leaned on the curveball more. Speaking of Brendan Miller, I was speaking with him a little bit about Jordan Wick's pitch usage, and he had a game. It was not his last start, but the one before, where he was pretty heavy. He used the curveball over the changeup in a lot of ways, and yeah, it's a changing pitch mix, and we knew he had the ability to do that in terms of like kind of adopting a new pitch, adapting existing pitches. But yeah, it came back to that fastball, which I think is appropriate talking about first round Jordan Wicks and his ability to take to coaching and adapt his pitch mix. And then also the pick a year later in Cade Horton, who has drastically changed his pitch mix in the span of a year. And his ability to take to coaching. And you mentioned the fastball with Jordan Wicks. I mean, I think that the theme of this episode, right, is the confidence we have in Cubs development from the minor leagues up to the major leagues. You talk about with Michael Busch continuing. Like I have a lot of faith in Dustin Kelly. Obviously, had a lot of faith in what the Cubs were doing with Jordan Wicks up through the system, and Tommy Hotovy knows what he's doing with Jordan Wicks at the major league level. So we turn to Cade Horton, who I know you've mentioned a few times where it's like, yeah, the fastball is good. The fastball is velo, but I know you've had a little bit of like just a little bit of concern with the fastball as he's come up. And like, I
Yep.
think that even if you have concern, you can look at what Jordan Wicks has done at the major league level and say maybe Cade Horton can just up a notch with the fastball once he reaches the major leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a theme for this episode, it's that when a prospect gets to the major leagues, like we don't think of those players as like the version they are then is who they're going to be. Like when we like a prospect, we are assuming development happens. And when we really like a prospect, it's because we think that there's some like easy ways for that prospect to get a lot better quickly. you know, I mean, if we talk about like Jameson Taillon, like, another first round pick, like a guy that was so well thought of out of high school, but like doesn't crush it in the minor leagues that well, gets like close to the majors, gets injured, misses 2 years, comes back, is okay. Like he had one really good year with the Pirates, but then I think like kept evolving. Like he is like the most like he's changed his career a bunch of times, got to the
Mm-hmm.
Yankees and it really worked out. And I mean like Cade is going to have the ability, I think, to like change the way he pitches in the major leagues a few different times. Like, I mean, I think he could be a guy that does what Jordan Wicks does and adds a bunch of ride to the fastball. I think he could be a guy that does what Justin Steele did and add a bunch of cut to the fastball. I think he could, I think he could ditch the four seamer almost in a way like Jameson Taillon did for a year and like go with sinkers at some point and like more like true cutters and not really be a guy that throws that many like true four seam fastballs. Like there's so many different routes for him. And that's what's exciting about him is like he has the foundation. These first round picks, like the reason we obsess over them is they have the foundations. And so if they get to AAA and they're showing like present major league skills, and you also know that they still have that like untapped upside that they're just going to keep improving in the majors, like that's what makes these guys extra exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's actually probably the biggest takeaway of the first round pick conversation is like the confidence in those guys in being able to adapt because they're good baseball players.
Right.
If it's a hitter, if it's a pitcher, like they are just a good baseball player. It doesn't matter what his pitch mix is. It doesn't
Yep.
matter that the fastball changes 3 times. It doesn't matter that he goes from being a curveball guy to a slider guy. It doesn't matter that he goes from three different grips of his changeup. Like those things don't matter because he's a good pitcher, he's a good baseball player, and he's shown
Yeah.
the ability to be good at different things, and he will continue to do that once they're in the major leagues, like Jordan Wicks, like Jameson Taillon, like we're hoping Cade Horton continues to do. Yeah, that's what defines in my eyes a first round pick, like showing results. But like guys that are drafted in the 15th round show results, like
Right.
they put up numbers in high school, they put up numbers in college, they have light tower power in batting practice, they throw a fastball 99 miles an hour, but it's like, can a guy adjust from, if the 99-mile-an-hour fastball is getting hit because it's too straight, can they then adjust? Like that's what takes the guy from an 8th round pick to a 1st round pick. So
Right. I
yeah,
can
that's
promise
exciting.
you in 2027, 2028, like there will be a blog post at, at Bleacher Nation or any of our favorite Cubs blogs. It'll be like, if Cade Horton makes this like pitching change, he'll really take off. Like those conversations are coming for everybody. And like, we're not asking Cade to be anything close to a finished product. Um, and what's just like I think so exciting about what happened with him in the last year is like the curveball and changeup, like those foundations already getting laid when he was in South Bend and then in
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. Like he's just got so much more for Tommy Hotovy to play with when he gets to Chicago. Like they'll be able to lean on fastball slider out of the gate like they are with Ben Brown right now, just going fastball curveball with Brown. And then Tommy will like get in the, he'll get in there and he will like adapt and then he'll adapt them again and adapt them again. And, that's what's going to be really exciting, I think.
We have 2 more first round draft picks, both guys that were drafted by the Cubs, 2 very different circumstances. We got Ian Happ and Ed Howard. I don't let's talk about Ed because I want to end with Ian Happ. I don't want to end with Ed.
Okay.
Ed Howard, 2020 draft pick, that weird COVID draft. He was drafted 3 picks before Pete Crow-Armstrong was selected. Ed was drafted 16th overall in that draft, out of Mount Carmel High School up by Chicago. Ed's gotten off to a rough year again this year at the plates. I don't know. Where do you want to start with Ed Howard here? Do you want to start with Ed Howard here?
No, I mean, I think I think we have to talk about, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's like informative when you're having first round conversations to like show that not all of them are going to be like super successful. And that's
Yeah.
not even to say that like Ed can't have a sort of second half of his minor league career, like at some point that where he really takes off. Like the one thing first rounders get are plenty of opportunities, and
Yep.
like Ed is going to get it. He's like, the Cubs are going to want it to work like this year, and then if it doesn't work, like if eventually he goes somewhere else, he's going to get opportunities because of a lot of the things he does so well. Yeah, it's that. I mean, I think the biggest thing with him was like that COVID year just made things so hard for players and for scouts. And I think Ed's personality and like the person he is gave so much confidence. Like, this guy will figure it out. This guy will grind. And like Ed has worked his tail off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the hit tool, just like it was further behind than I think the Cubs had a chance to realize. And that's, I think, what ultimately made it a pick that doesn't look great right now.
Yeah. I mean, what was it, 2021 was his first full year, obviously, of minor league baseball. He struggled, which was expected, coming off not having played an actual game since his junior year of high school. Is that right?
Pro ball had changed where
Yeah.
he couldn't go to short season ball. Like Eugene was gone, and so he had to go right to low A.
It was an aggressive assignment to low A for Ed Howard in South Bend in 2021. So he obviously struggled. He started off 2022, and in 2022 he got hurt. That horrific hip injury,
really bad. Yeah.
And then returned in 2023 and just wasn't. I don't think he was back 100% right from whether it was still hurt or it was just not comfortable yet from returning from the injury. 2023 just wasn't right. And now you're at 2024, and like maybe this is the first year where he's right. And it's like he was a 2020 draft pick. He's now 22 years old. I want to emphasize the point that you made. It's like if Ed Howard doesn't work out this year with the Cubs, and the Cubs and Ed Howard move on after the season, he will get picked up by another team because he was a first round draft pick, and because teams that what we just explained, what we just laid out, those everything going against Ed these past few years, right? A team is going to identify that and be like, you know what, like he just hasn't had a fair shake these last few years. It might not be right for the Cubs. Maybe he's not right in the organization anymore. But some team is going to say that's just not fair. What's happened to him? He was a first round talent for a reason. Let's pick him up and give him another chance. And like you said, the next part of his minor league career. It's not to say that Ed Howard's time is done with the Cubs. I mean, he's still gonna try to show out as well as he can this year in South Bend. And it'll be exciting to watch what he's doing. It's worth pointing out that he did get some playing time at third base, I think this week, which was interesting. He's had playing time at second base. And so this was a conversation that you, me, and Zumac had before the year. It's like, is he going to play all over the infield? Will he get some run in the outfield? Is he a defensive first shortstop? Like, what is Ed Howard? And so far, it's looking like they're going to play him over the infield a little bit. So, it's
one thing that has happened this year is Reggie Preciado's having a really good start to the year in low A, and I think they sort of backed him off, took some time to like really develop it off the field, and like sort of like made him, I think, probably believe that like a super sub is the way that you're gonna like that you can really rise here. And maybe that'll be in the cards for Ed, is like, maybe they do a long development stint, really work on that swing and say like, you're going to come back and you're going to play a bunch of positions and we're going to try this out. And like, do I think he's a guy that like could probably run into like a hot BABIP stretch and like hit 300 for like 2 months, and then we kind of like start to have those fun like, is that Howard? Like, is there a thing? Like, yeah, like that could happen this summer too, and like I'll be here for that. I'm rooting for it.
I mean, if he goes BABIP crazy like Christian Hernandez and Reggie Preciado have early on in the season this year, then you go.
Exactly.
All right, our last guy that we haven't talked about yet is Ian Happ, which seems kind of appropriate that we're leaving Ian Happ for last, because I think that he just gets talked about at the end a lot of different conversations, even though he's put together a pretty damn good career up to this point. Ian Happ was in that same draft class as Dansby Swanson, which is kind of weird to think about. He was drafted in 2015. He was the Cubs' 9th overall pick in that 2015 draft class out of the University of Cincinnati. Man, Ian is he's just done it. And I think that like the way he has gone about his business has been terrific. The way he's transitioned from kind of a second baseman to a utility guy to a Gold Glove left fielder, from a contact hitter to a power first guy, and then back to kind of an all around hitter. Just he has taken on. We talk about like Jameson Taillon taking on so many different versions of himself. Ian Happ has been like 12 different versions of himself in his first 7 years of his career.
Yeah. I mean, a guy that, it looked like the right-handed swing was not going to work. And like, is he just going to go to left-handed only? And then he had, I think it was at 22, maybe, that he like crushed it right-handed and had clearly put in a ton of work there. Like, just in like, what strikes me about Ian is just like an incredibly smart ball player that just figures it out. Like, the more run he gets, like, he's just going to figure out a way to get through slumps. Like, that's a guy I want Pete Crow-Armstrong to be around, like, before Ian exits. If Ian ever exits the organization, like, I want Ian and Pete to have some time together, because I think Ian could rub off on Pete in a really positive way of like, listen, like, you're striking out on a bunch of balls. Like, we've seen Ian happen those stretches where it just feels like he can't make any contact. Like, and he gets to the other side of those. Like, he finds the walks, like, during those times. He'll like have, then he'll go to Cincinnati, he'll hit 3 home runs in a series, and then he'll like and then we're just on a hot streak again. Like, he is such a good example for this organization of how to like grind through the bad stretches to get to the good ones. And that's something that like a lot of the guys, but especially Pete, I think could really like use as an example.
He's a professional. I mean, again, like we hinted at it earlier, it's like you're wanting to draft in the first round these guys that just get it, these guys that have it.
Yeah.
And Ian Happ has it. I mean, when was he sent back down? When was he sent back down to AAA? 2018? 2018 season, I think, right? When he was it was just not good, right? Like, it was
right.
Everybody was just ready to kind of cut bait on Ian Happ. It's like, this ain't it. It's not going to work. And think about how 2019. Think about how early it was in his career, in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, that he was drafted in 2015, and in 2019 we said, nope, it's over. It's over for Ian Happ. And that was 3 different versions of him ago, right? That was like, now it's 2024, and he is a completely different version, an extended contract version of Ian Happ that is really just like as about as good across the board of a player as you're going to get in this Cubs organization.
Yeah, I mean, drafted as a second baseman. Like, talk about like Matt Shaw, he's a great example for Matt Shaw of just like, you'll find your spot. Like, they will find a spot for you if you're a hitter. Like,
if you hit.
Yeah, I mean, the Cubs put a lot into the people that they draft in the first round. It is extremely important to them. It's like, really, I think it has been that way since like Jason McLeod was in charge. Jason, I know for a fact, like, really puts a ton of emphasis into that. And Ian is like, Kyle Schwarber is like outwardly, like, he's like what a leader is. Like, the Cubs, when they drafted Kyle Schwarber, were like, this could be the captain of the organization. Ian is not that type of person. Like, he's not that like outward in that outward.
He's not Dansby
on the field, right?
Dansby's
but he is such a good example to the guys in this organization for so many reasons. And like, him succeeding as a top 10 pick, but also having so much failure along the way, man, like, I hope they're holding him up to all the minor leaguers as like evidence of, how this can work for them.
I could not have said it any better. I love it. I love it. Anything else you want to hit on before we wrap this up?
No, it was nice. It was a wide ranging, sort of just open. I don't think any of us knew where we were going to take it. And, but I think we found enough connection points between the guys along the way to make it, sort of a conversation worth having.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing this topic up. I hope you guys out there listening enjoyed this conversation. We'll be back with more kind of recap. Honestly, last week I came on myself and basically all I did was kind of recap the first full weekend of action. Just ran through things that happened. So if you guys want some of that, you go back and listen to the last episode if you have not. In the meantime, we'll be back next week covering some of the action. I think that Zumac is back next week, I believe. Hopefully, I'm not putting him on the spot by saying that, but I think he's back next week. But you want to plug yourself, Brian, or anything else that we can find?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing 5 stars again this year on Twitter, so I know that's a way that people um, enjoy just sort of following the system through that basic way. So like I'll be doing that a bunch this year. I mean, every game day I'll have it, and then a little bit on the 1060 West Discord. I'll be expanding on players from time to time. So that's going to be it for a little while, but that keeps me busy. I'm going to be watching the games enough to like have some takes on here for you.
Yeah, the 1060 West Discord has been going. It's been popping off since minor league baseball has started. I mean, I live on the Prospect channel, but I mean, there's other conversations to be had too. But like the Prospect channel has been popping off since the season started. It's been terrific. So, yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. You can find the show anywhere where you listen to podcasts. If you're checking it out on YouTube, please subscribe and send it a like. Give your comments. Let us know what you think about the Cubs first round talents over the past decade plus or so that are still in the organization. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back in your ears in one short week. Thanks, guys.
Go Cubs.